The packed first-class cabin fell silent as Zara Johnson, the 19-year-old black tech prodigy, stood her ground against the hostile flight attendant. "I said move to economy where you belong," the attendant hissed, pointing to the white woman, waiting expectantly. Zara's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, pulling up the Skyline Airlines executive profile page. "Stephanie, is it?" Zara's voice carried through the cabin. "I'd like you to meet someone." She turned the screen toward the flight attendant. "That's me, Zara Johnson, majority owner of Skyline Airlines, your boss. What would happen next in this high-stakes confrontation that would change the airline industry forever? Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination and justice, let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up against racism and fighting for equality, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more incredible true stories of courage in the face of prejudice. Zara Johnson had always been exceptional. At just 17, while her classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, she developed an aviation logistics algorithm that revolutionized flight scheduling. The complex code could predict weather patterns, optimize fuel consumption, and reduce delays by a staggering 40%. Major airlines scrambled to license her technology, but Zara had bigger dreams. She grew up watching her parents struggle with discrimination. Her father, a brilliant aerospace engineer, was repeatedly passed over for promotions at Skyline Airlines, despite his exceptional qualifications. Her mother, an accomplished flight attendant, endured daily microaggressions until she finally quit. Their experiences shaped Zara's mission to transform the aviation industry from within. Using the millions from her algorithm patents, Zara executed a brilliant financial maneuver. Through a complex web of investment vehicles and shell companies, she quietly acquired 51% of Skyline Airlines stock over 18 months. The business world remained oblivious that a teenage black girl now controlled one of America's largest carriers. Only one person knew her secret: Vivian Blackwood, a 60-year-old former executive who had mentored Zara since discovering her talent at a high school science fair. Vivian had fought her own battles as one of the few black, female executives in aviation and recognized Zara's potential to create lasting change. "Remember," Vivian had cautioned during their last video call, "observation before action. Experience the airline as a passenger before revealing yourself to the board." That's exactly what Zara planned during this transcontinental flight from New York to San Francisco. Dressed in a Stanford University hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, she looked like any other college student. Her natural curls pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no designer accessories, nothing to suggest she was anything but ordinary. What Zara didn't know was that Stephanie Walsh, the senior flight attendant working first class today, had a 15-year history with Skyline. Stephanie had joined when the airline still proudly advertised its all-American image, a thinly veiled code for its predominantly white staff. As diversity initiatives slowly changed the company's demographics, Stephanie's resentment grew. 12 discrimination complaints had been filed against Stephanie over the years. All mysteriously disappeared, thanks to Richard Harmon, the airline's chief operating officer. Richard, a 55-year-old white man with political connections and old money, considered himself the airline's true authority. He'd been furious when anonymous investors acquired controlling interest but hadn't yet identified Zara as the buyer. As Zara settled into seat 3A, she noticed Jason Miller, a 34-year-old white man in an expensive suit, taking the seat beside her. He nodded politely, then returned to his legal briefs. The Baker & Associates civil rights law letterhead caught Zara's eye, but she thought nothing more of it. Just as boarding neared completion, Zara's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We know who you are. Stay in your lane or regret it." She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Someone knew her identity, but who and how? The aircraft door closed with a heavy thud, sealing her inside with an unknown threat. The Boeing 787 hummed with pre-flight energy as final passengers stowed their belongings. Zara tucked her phone away, the threatening message still burning in her mind. She needed to stay calm and observe, just as Vivian had advised. This flight would reveal the true Skyline Airlines experience, but she never anticipated becoming the center of an incident herself. Stephanie Walsh strode through first class, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair bouncing with each step. She stopped beside each white passenger, offering warm smiles and personalized greetings. "Mr. Davidson, lovely to see you again." And, "Mrs. Peters, your usual champagne?" But when she reached Zara, her demeanor frosted over. "Ticket," Stephanie demanded flatly, hand extended. Zara presented her boarding pass. "Good afternoon." Stephanie scrutinized the ticket. Then Zara, eyes narrowing. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" Her voice carried, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "Yes, seat 3A. Zara pointed to her assigned spot. Stephanie's lips pursed. These tickets can be confusing. She spoke slowly, as if explaining to a child. "This is first class. Economy is toward the back." Jason Miller, the attorney beside Zara, glanced up from his documents with a frown. "I know what first class is," Zara replied evenly. "This is my assigned seat." Stephanie sighed dramatically and moved on, but returned minutes later with another flight attendant. "Carlos, we have a situation," she said loudly. "This young lady seems confused about her seating assignment." Carlos, a Latino man in his 30s, checked Zara's ticket and nodded. "Everything's correct, Stephanie. She's assigned to 3A. Stephanie's jaw tightened, but she walked away without another word. Zara exhaled slowly. The flight hadn't even departed, and already she'd witnessed discriminatory treatment firsthand. She made mental notes for future policy changes when a commotion at the front caught her attention. An older white woman with expensive jewelry and a designer handbag was speaking animatedly to Stephanie. Margaret Whitfield, heir to the Whitfield, hotel fortune and a regular first-class passenger, was accustomed to special treatment. Today, she wanted Zara's seat. "I specifically need that seat," Margaret insisted, pointing directly at Zara. "Window seats help with my vertigo." Stephanie nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield, let me handle this." They approached Zara together, Stephanie now armed with authority and backup. "Excuse me," Stephanie announced loudly. "You'll need to relocate. Mrs. Whitfield requires your seat for medical reasons." Zara remained calm. "I'm sorry to hear about Mrs. Whitfield's condition, but I've paid for this specific seat." "Look," Stephanie's voice hardened. "We have a valued customer with medical needs. There's a perfectly good seat in economy." "Why economy?" Jason Miller interjected. "If it's just about a window seat, there are 3 other empty window seats. In first class." Margaret waved dismissively. "Those won't do. I need this particular side of the aircraft." The situation escalated as Stephanie's demands grew louder and other passengers began watching. Some looked uncomfortable, others openly, curious about the unfolding drama. "I've asked nicely." Stephanie's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "This isn't the place for people like you anyway. Either move voluntarily or I'll call security to remove you from this flight." The cabin fell silent. Zara felt dozens of eyes on her, judging, waiting. In that moment, she made a decision. Enough observation. It was time for action. "Stephanie, is it?" Zara's voice carried through the cabin as she reached for her phone. "I'd like you to meet someone." She turned the screen toward the flight attendant, displaying the Skyline Airlines executive profile page. "That's me, Zara Johnson, majority owner of Skyline Airlines, your boss." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Stephanie's face drained of color. Margaret Whitfield stepped back as if physically struck. "That's impossible," Stephanie stammered. "The majority shareholder is me," Zara finished firmly. "I own 51% of this airline. Now, would you like to explain why you're trying to remove the owner of Skyline from her paid first-class seat?" Carlos, the other flight attendant, looked mortified. Jason Miller was already typing notes into his phone, and Margaret Whitfield, for perhaps the first time in her privileged life, was speechless. "What do you think Zara should do next?" Comment number 1 if you think she should have Stephanie removed from the flight immediately. Comment number 2 if you believe she should continue observing to gather more evidence of discrimination. And if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling, hit that like button and subscribe to show your support for those fighting against Injustice every day. The tension in that first-class cabin was electric, but what happened next would shake the entire airline industry to its foundation. Would Zara use her power to exact immediate revenge, or was she playing a longer, more strategic game? And who sent that threatening text message? Stay tuned to find out how this confrontation escalates beyond anything Zara could have imagined. The engines roared as Flight 1923 finally departed, 40 minutes behind schedule. The cabin vibrated with tension thicker than the clouds outside. Passengers whispered behind hands and magazines, stealing glances at the unprecedented drama unfolding in first class. Carlos Rivera, now the lone flight attendant serving the premium cabin, moved with nervous energy. Stephanie had been immediately reassigned to economy class, her face a mask of humiliation and rage as she retreated down the aisle. Every few minutes, Carlos approached Zara with increasingly desperate attempts at damage control. "Ms. Johnson, please accept our deepest apologies." He placed another complimentary champagne before her. The fourth she'd politely declined. "If there's anything at all you need, just treating all passengers with respect would be sufficient," Zara replied, her voice quiet but firm. She turned to her laptop, opening a secure email to Vivian Blackwood. Incident occurred on Flight 1923. Senior FA attempted to remove me from first class to accommodate white passenger claiming medical necessity. Explicit statement made about people like me not belonging in first class. Identified myself as owner. Documenting details for policy review. Meeting needed upon arrival. As Zara typed, she noticed a reflection in her screen. Margaret Whitfield, now seated across the aisle, was watching her while whispering to her seatmate. The woman's perfectly manicured hand partially covered her mouth, but Zara could read the doubt in her expression. Probably just lying about owning the airline. These people always exaggerate. Jason Miller, the civil rights attorney beside Zara, cleared his throat. "Don't let them get to you," he murmured. "I've seen this playbook before." He slid his business card onto her tray table. "Jason Miller, Baker and Associates. We specialize in transportation discrimination cases. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident." Zara studied the card. "What makes you say that?" "I've received complaints about Skyline for years. Never enough evidence for a class action. But today..." He glanced meaningfully around the cabin. Today was illuminating. Before Zara could respond, her phone vibrated again. Another text from the unknown number. "Ownership won't protect you for long. Board meeting in progress. Enjoy your temporary position." A cold wave of realization washed over Zara. Someone in the corporate structure not only knew her identity but was actively working against her. She quickly checked her secure executive portal and found an emergency board meeting had indeed been called by Richard Harmon, the COO. The official reason: addressing public relations crisis and leadership concerns. They were moving against her while she was literally in the air. At that exact moment, 35,000 feet below, Richard Harmon stood before the hastily assembled board members in Skyline's Manhattan headquarters. His tailored suit couldn't hide the sweat beating at his temples. "Gentlemen, ladies, we have a situation," he began, deliberately avoiding mentioning that the majority shareholder was absent. "An unfortunate incident has occurred that requires immediate action to protect the company's reputation and stock value." What Richard didn't know was that a passenger 6 rows behind Zara had recorded the entire confrontation. As the board meeting continued, the video was uploading to social media, buffered by the plane's spotty Wi-Fi but steadily gaining traction. Skyline racism began trending before Flight 1923 even reached the Midwest. Vivian Blackwood, monitoring the situation from San Francisco, watched with growing alarm as both the unauthorized board meeting and the viral video unfolded simultaneously. Her attempts to call Richard went straight to voicemail. Her emergency texts to Zara disappeared into the digital ether of airplane mode. By the time Flight 1923 began its descent into San Francisco International Airport, the video had 2 million views. The company's stock had dropped 12%, and a crowd of reporters awaited at the terminal. Zara felt the shift immediately, upon landing. As passengers activated their phones, Gasps and murmurs spread throughout the cabin. People were suddenly looking at their screens, then at her, with new recognition. "Ms. Johnson," Carlos approached, his professional demeanor cracking. "There appears to be a situation at the terminal. Airport security has requested you remain on board until they can escort you safely." "Security?" Zara questioned. "I don't need airline protocol, ma'am," he insisted, "for VIPs when there's media presence." Jason Miller leaned close. "Be careful," he warned. "I've seen corporate security used to isolate whistleblowers and complainants. They're not always there to protect you." Zara nodded almost imperceptibly as 4 uniformed security officers entered the aircraft. The lead officer, a stern-faced man with captain's stripes, approached with rehearsed courtesy. "Ms. Johnson will be escorting you through a private exit to avoid the media situation. Please come with us." As Zara gathered her belongings, she noticed something troubling. The security team wore Skyline Airlines patches, not airport security. Insignia. These men reported directly to corporate security, which ultimately answered to Richard Harmon. The realization hit her. She wasn't being protected. She was being contained. Passengers watched in silence as Zara was led through first class toward the front exit. Margaret Whitfield smirked openly as she passed. Through the small aircraft windows, Zara could see the media assembled on the tarmac, cameras ready. But the security team didn't lead her toward the terminal. Instead, they directed her down a service staircase to a waiting private vehicle with tinted windows. "Wait," Zara protested. "I need to make a statement to—" "Direct orders from corporate, Ms. Johnson," the security lead cut her off. "For your safety." As they ushered her into the vehicle, Zara glimpsed Vivian Blackwood arguing with airport staff at a distance, frantically trying to reach the aircraft. Their eyes met briefly before the car door closed, sealing Zara off from her only ally. The vehicle pulled away, not toward the main terminal but toward a separate administrative building. Zara's phone vibrated continuously with notifications, but when she tried to call Vivian, she discovered her signal was suddenly blocked. "We're taking you to a secure room," the security captain explained, his tone neutral. "The situation has escalated beyond our expectations." Minutes later, Zara found herself in what appeared to be a conference room in the administrative wing. The door closed behind the security team with an ominous click. She tried the handle, locked from the outside. What had begun as a simple observation, flight had transformed into something far more sinister. Zara Johnson, majority owner of Skyline Airlines, was now effectively a prisoner in her own company. Zara pressed her ear against the door, listening to the security team's retreating footsteps. The secure room was spacious enough, a corporate conference room with leather chairs and a polished table, but the locked door transformed it into a gilded cage. Through the window, she could see the distant terminal where crowds and camera crews had gathered, their presence confirming what she already suspected. This story had exploded. Her phone, though unable to make calls, still received data intermittently. Notifications flooded the screen faster than she could process them. The viral video, now viewed by millions, captured every moment of her confrontation with Stephanie. Hashtags proliferated. Flying Skyline racism. For Zara Johnson. For first class while black. The airline's stock was in freefall, losing 20 points since the market opened. A financial alert caught her attention. Emergency Skyline board meeting results in chaos. Temporary leadership transition. The article was paywalled, but the headline told her enough. Richard Harmon was making his move while she was conveniently detained. Outside the administrative building, the scene grew chaotic. Reporters surrounded the main terminal, where passengers from Flight 1923 emerged with their own videos and testimonies. Airport staff, overwhelmed by the situation, struggled to maintain order. "Yes, she said she owned the airline," a middle-aged woman told Fox News. The flight attendant was absolutely mortified when she found out. The way they treated her, before knowing who she was, another passenger shook his head for the ABC cameras. It was disgusting, plain and simple. Meanwhile, in the economy section of the deplaning area, Stephanie Walsh found herself surrounded by her own media contingent. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her perfect makeup as she delivered a carefully rehearsed statement. "I've dedicated 15 years to Skyline Airlines," she sobbed. One misunderstanding, and my entire career is being canceled by social media. I have black friends. I've never discriminated against anyone. The cameras ate it up, broadcasting her tears nationwide. Across the airfield, Vivian Blackwood fought her own battle, showing her executive credentials to increasingly resistant security personnel. I'm the chief strategy officer, she insisted, her authoritative voice carrying. I need immediate access to Ms. Johnson. Sorry, ma'am, the security officer replied, checking his tablet. Your credentials have been temporarily suspended. Direct orders from Acting CEO Richard Harmon. Acting CEO? Vivian's shock was genuine. That's impossible without a full board vote, which can't happen without the majority shareholder. Just following orders, ma'am. Inside the administrative building, Richard Harmon himself stood before a hastily assembled press corps, projecting calm authority. At 55, his silver hair and tailored suit embodied corporate America's idealized image of leadership. Skyline. Airlines takes all allegations of impropriety seriously, he read from a prepared statement. The incident on Flight 1923 represents a serious departure from our company values. The employee in question has been suspended pending investigation, and we are reaching out to Ms. Johnson to address her concerns personally. A reporter shouted, "Is it true that Zara Johnson owns 51% of Skyline?" Richards practiced. Smile never faltered. Ms. Johnson is an important investor who recently acquired shares through various investment vehicles. However, day-to-day operations remain under experienced leadership while we evaluate her potential contributions. At 19, she naturally requires mentorship in corporate governance. The dismissive words sparked fresh outrage online. Within minutes, the hashtag #JackRichardHarmonIsOverParty joined the trending topics. Back in the secure room, Zara finally accessed the company servers through her laptop, bypassing the room's communication blocks by connecting to an obscure administrative network she'd discovered during her preliminary research into the company. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Richard had called an emergency session citing leadership crisis. Using arcane bylaws, he'd convinced enough board members to grant him temporary executive authority. Critically, the vote wasn't valid, without her participation. But Richard was moving forward anyway, counting on confusion and corporate bureaucracy to delay any challenge. As Zara dug deeper, another notification appeared. A direct message from Jason Miller. Security isolated you illegally. Attorneys at terminal. Need your location. Evidence suggests coordinated effort to remove you from power. Before she could respond, the conference room door swung open. 2 security officers entered, followed by a distinguished older woman Zara recognized immediately from company files. Margaret Whitfield's assistant. Ms. Johnson. The woman's voice was professionally pleasant. Mr. Harmon has arranged for your transfer to corporate headquarters for a full debriefing. A private car is waiting. Zara stood her ground. I'm not going anywhere. As majority shareholder, I demand immediate access to my executive team and the board. The woman's pleasant expression never changed. That won't be possible right now. The situation requires delicate handling, and Mr. Harmon feels. Mr. Harmon doesn't have the authority to detain me or make decisions without my input, Zara interrupted. What's happening is illegal corporate obstruction. The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Please don't make this difficult, the assistant continued. For everyone's comfort, we've arranged. My comfort? Zara's voice rose. Was it for my comfort that your security team locked me in this room? Is it for my comfort that Richard Harmon is giving unauthorized press statements about me? Or perhaps it's for my comfort that Stephanie Walsh is out there playing the victim after trying to remove me from my paid seat? The security officers shifted uneasily, clearly unprepared for this level of resistance. Ms. Johnson, we have orders to escort you. Your orders are invalid, Zara cut in sharply. And if you touch me without consent, that's assault. I suspect neither of you wants to risk your pensions on Richard Harmon's illegal power play. The standoff stretched into uncomfortable silence until one of the guards' radios crackled. Security. Team Alpha. Be advised. Federal transportation authorities have entered the terminal requesting access to all parties involved in Flight 1923 incident. Media presence has tripled. Repeat, federal authorities on site. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Self-preservation replaced corporate loyalty as the guards realized they stood at a pivotal moment in what was rapidly becoming a national scandal. "Ma'am," the lead officer addressed Margaret's assistant, "I think we need to reevaluate the situation." Before the woman could respond, the building's fire alarm blared to life, emergency lights flashing, sprinklers activated, drenching everyone in seconds. In the confusion, Zara made her decision. Grabbing her belongings, she pushed past the disoriented group and ran for the emergency exit. The alarm wasn't an accident, she realized. Someone had created a diversion. As she burst through the exit door into the California sunlight, Zara found Vivian Blackwood waiting beside a nondescript sedan, driver's door open. "Get in!" Vivian shouted over the alarms. "Richard's playing hardball, and we need to move fast. He's deleted the discrimination complaints archive and convinced half the board you're staging a publicity stunt." Zara dove into the vehicle as security personnel emerged from the building behind them. As they sped away, Zara caught a glimpse of Jason Miller watching from a distance, phone raised to capture evidence of her effective detainment. The battle for Skyline Airlines had moved beyond a simple incident of discrimination. It had become a high-stakes corporate war, with Zara fighting not just for justice in one case, but for control of the company she rightfully owned. Vivian's sedan sped through the back roads of the airport complex, avoiding the main thoroughfares where news vans and airport security would be looking for them. Zara watched the administrative building shrink in the side mirror, her mind racing, faster than the vehicle. "They locked me in," Zara said, still processing the reality of her situation. "In my own company." "Richard's desperate," Vivian replied, eyes fixed on the road. "The board meeting was completely unauthorized. He's claiming emergency powers under a bylaw that hasn't been invoked since the airline's founding." Zara pulled out her phone, but the screen showed no signal. "They're blocking my communications somehow. Corporate security has signal jammers, technically illegal, but they use them for VIP privacy during sensitive executive transports." Vivian handed Zara a burner phone. "Use this instead. Clean, untraceable." Zara examined the basic flip phone. "Where are we going?" "Hotel suite I booked under a pseudonym. We need a secure location to regroup." Vivian took a sharp turn onto a service road. "Richard has consolidated power remarkably fast. He must have been planning this coup for months, just waiting for an opportunity." In the hotel suite 20 minutes later, Zara finally sat before a laptop with reliable internet access. The room's large windows offered a sweeping view of San Francisco Bay, but her attention remained fixed on the screen, where the full scale of Richard's operation was becoming clear. "I can't access half the executive servers," she muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. "He's locked me out of my own systems." "Try the backup network," Vivian suggested. "The one we established after detecting unusual activity last month." Zara nodded, switching tactics. Her exceptional programming skills had led her to create redundant access points when she first acquired the airline, a precaution that now proved prescient. After several tense minutes, she bypassed the security protocols. "I'm in, but something's wrong." Her voice tightened. "Files are disappearing in real time. Someone's deleting the discrimination complaint archives." On the screen, document folders vanished one after another. Years of evidence, hundreds of complaints detailing systemic racism within the airline, all systematically erased from the central servers. "That's illegal destruction of evidence," Vivian gasped, leaning over Zara's shoulder. "They're covering their tracks." "Not just covering tracks." Zara's eyes narrowed as she typed furiously. "They're building a counter-narrative. Look at these new documents being uploaded." The screen displayed a series of fabricated performance reviews and incident reports, all painting Zara as an unstable, inexperienced investor making irrational demands. There were even doctored emails supposedly from Zara to Stephanie, threatening the flight attendant before the flight ever took place. "They're framing me," Zara whispered, "making it look like I orchestrated this whole incident as a publicity stunt." Vivian shook her head in disbelief. "Richard always played dirty, but this—" "Wait," Zara interrupted, noticing a pattern in the deletions. The files are being erased by someone using Stephanie Walsh's login credentials. She's actively helping them. Impossible. Stephanie was just giving tearful interviews at the airport. Unless... Zara's fingers raced across the keyboard, accessing the airport's security camera feeds through a back door she'd discovered during her preliminary audit of company systems. She quickly located footage of the administrative wing from 30 minutes earlier. The grainy video showed Stephanie Walsh entering a side door, makeup still smeared from her theatrical tears. Seconds later, Richard Harmon appeared, ushering her inside with a protective arm around her shoulders. They're working together, Zara realized. This goes deeper than one discriminatory incident. Further investigation revealed a hidden connection. Stephanie wasn't just an employee with repeated discrimination complaints. She was Richard's former sister-in-law, maintaining close ties even after his divorce. For years, she had been his eyes and ears in the cabin crew, reporting on diversity initiatives and helping identify employees who could be pushed out. I need to broadcast this information before they can complete their cover-up, Zara decided, reaching for the burner phone. "Who are you calling?" Vivian asked. "First, Jason Miller. We need legal representation ready to move. Then, I'm using my emergency access to send a message through the airport announcement system. It's time to let Vivian know exactly where I am and what's happening." As Zara outlined her plan, the laptop screen suddenly flickered. A warning appeared. "Unauthorized access detected. System lockdown initiated." "They've found us," Zara realized, quickly disconnecting from the network. "But not before I downloaded something they don't want anyone to see." She turned the screen toward Vivian, displaying an offshore account statement in Richard's name. Regular payments flowed in from a shell company that, upon closer inspection, connected directly to Margaret Whitfield's family trust. "This isn't just about racism," Zara said quietly. "They've been embezzling from the airline for years, using discrimination complaints as leverage to silence witnesses. When employees threatened to speak out about racism, they were paid off through these accounts off the books. And now the majority owner is a 19-year-old black woman who can't be bought." Vivian completed the thought. Their worst nightmare. Before they could discuss further, Zara's burner phone rang. Jason Miller's voice came through, urgent and clear. "Zara, listen carefully. Richard Harmon has filed emergency restraining orders claiming you're attempting a hostile takeover. Security teams are searching the city for you. They're monitoring all official channels." "I need to reach the board members directly," Zara replied. "Most of them don't even know what's happening. That's why I'm calling. I've secured a conference room at my firm's office. 3 board members have agreed to meet us there. They're questioning Richard's story, especially after seeing the viral video." Zara checked the time. "We'll be there in 30 minutes. Meanwhile, can you file emergency injunctions to prevent further deletion of company records?" "Already done," Jason confirmed. "And Zara, be careful. My sources say Richard has hired private security beyond the company team. These aren't corporate guards with retirement plans to protect. These people operate in gray areas." As they prepared to leave, Zara made one final check of social media. The hashtags had evolved. "We Stand With Zara" now trended alongside posts, questioning Richard's hasty press conference. Public opinion was turning, but corporate machinery moved with relentless precision. "Ready?" Vivian asked, car keys in hand. Zara nodded, determination replacing the shock and hurt she'd felt earlier. This isn't just about one incident anymore. It's about every person who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere because of their skin color. Richard picked the wrong fight. They exited through the hotel's service entrance, unaware that security cameras had already captured their arrival. In a downtown office, Richard Harmon watched their departure on a tablet, screen phone pressed to his ear. "She's on the move," he informed the person on the other end. "Heading to Baker and Associates, most likely. Yes, I understand the stakes. Do whatever is necessary." Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could fight back like Zara? Comment number 1 if you admire her technical skills in fighting this corporate conspiracy. Comment number 2 if you think Richard and Stephanie deserve criminal charges for destroying evidence. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe corporations should be held accountable for systemic racism. The battle for Skyline Airlines has escalated from a first-class confrontation to corporate espionage and potential criminal activity. Will Zara be able to reach the board members before Richard's private security finds her? What damning evidence is hidden in those offshore accounts? And who else might be part of this conspiracy that's been operating for years? Stay with us as this high-stakes corporate thriller continues. The sleek glass tower of Baker & Associates rose 42 stories above San Francisco's financial district. As Vivian parked in the underground garage, Zara surveyed their surroundings with newfound wariness. Every security camera, every passing car, every stranger on a phone now represented potential surveillance. "We'll take the service elevator," Jason Miller instructed via text. 15th floor, then switch to the executive lift. Richard's people will be watching the main entrance. The building's service areas proved labyrinthine, designed to keep support staff invisible to high-powered attorneys and their wealthy clients. Zara and Vivian navigated through loading docks and maintenance corridors, following Jason's detailed instructions until they reached a nondescript elevator requiring keycard access. "Ms. Blackwood, Ms. Johnson?" A young paralegal appeared, swiping them through. "Mr. Miller is waiting. The situation has escalated." Upstairs, the conference room hummed with tense energy. 3 Skyline board members sat around a polished table: Davis Channing, the airline's former general counsel; Wei Zhang, representing Asian investment groups; and Isabella Diaz, the company's most recently appointed director. All looked up with undisguised curiosity as Zara entered. "Thank you for coming," Jason began, standing beside a digital display showing Skyline's plummeting stock price. "As you can see, time is critical." Zara moved directly to the point. "Richard Harmon has staged a corporate coup. He's illegally seized operational control, detained me against my will, and is systematically destroying evidence of discrimination within the company." Davis Channing, silver-haired and cautious, frowned. "These are serious allegations. The emergency board meeting this morning was presented as a response to your public confrontation with staff." "A confrontation I didn't initiate," Zara countered, connecting her laptop to the room's display system. "And the meeting was invalid without my participation as majority shareholder." For the next 20 minutes, Zara presented her evidence. Methodically, the discriminatory incident, her detention, the systematic deletion of complaint records, and the suspicious offshore accounts linking Richard and Margaret Whitfield. "Most damning," she concluded, "is this communication log showing Stephanie Walsh and Richard Harmon coordinated before, during, and after the flight. This wasn't random discrimination. It was a targeted attempt to provoke an incident they could use against me." Isabella Diaz leaned forward. "Why would they target you specifically? Richard didn't even know you were on that flight." "He did know," Vivian interjected. "There was a leak. Someone informed him that Zara would be traveling incognito to assess operations." Wei Zhang's expression hardened. "The board should have been informed immediately that the majority shareholder was being detained. Richard told us you had left voluntarily for privacy reasons." "Because he's building a narrative," Jason explained, laying out legal documents. "One where Zara is an inexperienced troublemaker, unfit for corporate leadership. These restraining orders filed this morning seek to bar her from company premises pending psychiatric evaluation." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "We need to call an emergency board meeting, a legitimate one," Channing finally stated, "with all members present, including Ms. Johnson." "Richard won't attend if he knows I'll be there," Zara pointed out. "And he's currently acting as if he has executive authority." The discussion continued, strategies forming and dissolving as they weighed options. Outside the conference room windows, afternoon shadows lengthened across the city. On the street 15 stories below, a black SUV with tinted windows parked directly in front of the building. Zara's temporary phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "They know where you are. Richard's private security team entering the building now. Back entrance, not alone, armed." "We need to move," Zara announced abruptly, showing the message to Jason. "Richard's escalating beyond corporate politics." Jason's face tightened. "This is a law office. He wouldn't dare." "He detained me in an airport, deleted corporate records, and filed false claims about my mental health. Zara cut him off. He's desperate. The building's security alert system chimed softly. A mechanical voice announced, "Attention. Unauthorized access detected in Service Area B. Security personnel en route." "That's our cue," Vivian said grimly. "Is there another way out?" Jason moved quickly, leading them toward an executive bathroom with a hidden panel. Partners' escape route, for when clients receive unfavorable verdicts and reporters are waiting downstairs. The narrow passage led to an adjacent building's maintenance area. As they hurried through, Zara heard heavy footsteps and authoritative voices behind them. Richard's security team had reached the conference room. "Where are we going?" Zara whispered as they descended a utility stairwell. "Courthouse," Jason replied tersely. "Judge Kimura owes me a favor. We're filing for emergency injunctive relief and a restraining order against Richard, not the other way around." 20 minutes and one harrowing taxi ride later, they hurried up the courthouse steps. The massive building's classical architecture projected permanence and authority, qualities Zara desperately needed on her side. Inside a private chamber, Judge Helen Kimura, a formidable woman in her 60s with a reputation for efficiency, reviewed their hastily prepared documents. "Let me be clear," she said, peering over reading glasses. "You're alleging that Mr. Harmon has effectively kidnapped the majority owner of a major airline, destroyed evidence relevant to discrimination complaints, and is now pursuing her with armed private security?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jason confirmed. "We have digital evidence of the record deletion and witness testimony regarding Ms. Johnson's detainment at the airport." The judge turned to Zara. "And you can prove you're the majority shareholder?" Zara provided documentation from her secure financial accounts. "I acquired controlling interests through various investment vehicles over 18 months. The transactions are complex, but completely legal." Judge Kimura nodded slowly. "I've seen enough to issue a temporary restraining order against Mr. Harmon, preventing him from exercising any executive authority pending a full hearing." As the judge signed the order, Zara's phone vibrated with new notifications. Social media was exploding with fresh developments. Someone had leaked security footage from the airport showing Zara being escorted away by Skyline security, effectively confirming her claims of detention. Simultaneously, Stephanie Walsh had given another interview, this one contradicting her earlier tearful claims. Now she alleged that corporate politics had placed her in an impossible position, hinting at pressure from leadership. "She's distancing herself from Richard," Vivian observed. "The ship is starting to sink." As they left the courthouse with the signed orders, Zara spotted a familiar face across the street. Margaret Whitfield stood beside a luxury sedan, speaking intensely with a man whose back was turned. When he pivoted slightly, Zara recognized Richard Harmon's profile. "They're following us personally now," she murmured to Jason. "Not for long," he replied, pointing to an approaching police cruiser. "That's our escort to your next meeting." "Meeting? With whom?" Jason allowed himself a small smile. "The Federal Aviation Administration. They're very interested in possible safety violations stemming from discriminatory practices, and the SEC has joined the conversation, given the suspicious financial activity you've uncovered." As they entered the police vehicle, Zara caught a final glimpse of Richard and Margaret. Their expressions had transformed from confidence to alarm as they spotted her police escort. For the first time since the nightmare began, Richard's composed facade cracked, revealing the panic beneath. The real battle was just beginning, but Zara had something Richard had lost: the moral and legal high ground. The question now was how far he would go to regain control before everything collapsed around him. The Skyline Airlines emergency board meeting convened at 7:30 the following morning in the downtown office of a neutral third-party law firm. Security was tight, with private contractors checking identifications against approved lists and scanning for recording devices. The boardroom itself had been swept for bugs twice before the members arrived. Zara entered last, flanked by Vivian and Jason. She had abandoned her casual college attire for a tailored charcoal suit that projected competence without compromising her youth or identity. Her natural hair was styled professionally, and a simple, Gold pendant, her mother's, provided the only personal touch. Richard Harmon's face briefly registered shock at her appearance before hardening into practiced neutrality. He sat midway down the long mahogany table surrounded by allies, 3 board members known to support his leadership, Margaret Whitfield, attending as a major investor representative, and 2 attorneys from the company's regular firm. The remaining 8 board members occupied various positions along the table, their alliances unclear in this unprecedented situation. The chairman, Howard Peterson, a 72-year-old industry veteran, called the meeting to order with visible discomfort. "Before we begin, I must acknowledge the unusual circumstances," Peterson began. "We have competing claims of executive authority, serious allegations of misconduct, and a court order delivered to my residence at 5 this morning." He held up Judge Kimura's signed injunction. "This temporarily suspends Mr. Harmon from executive functions pending investigation." Richard's attorney immediately objected. "That order was obtained under false pretenses and without proper representation from Skyline's legal team. We're filing to have it dismissed this afternoon." "Nevertheless, it stands for now," Peterson replied. "Which brings us to our agenda. Resolving the leadership crisis and addressing the public relations disaster currently devaluing our stock by 28% and counting. For the next hour, the battle unfolded through procedural maneuvers and careful posturing. Richard presented his narrative first. Zara was an inexperienced investor using social justice issues to hijack corporate control. The flight incident was unfortunate but exaggerated for media attention. His temporary assumption of executive authority was necessary to stabilize the company during a crisis. "Ms. Johnson has never run so much as a lemonade stand," Richard concluded smoothly. "Now she wants to control an international airline based on one unfortunate customer service incident. This is about experience versus activism, plain and simple." When Zara's turn came, she approached the situation differently. Rather than immediately defending herself, she connected her laptop to the room's display system. "Before I address Mr. Harmon's claims, I'd like to share what he's been desperately trying to hide." The screen filled with employee discrimination complaints, hundreds filed over 5 years, systematically buried or dismissed. Each complaint was coded by outcome. NFA, no further action. Settled, with accompanying confidential payment. Amounts, or terminated. Employee eventually fired for unrelated performance issues. "These records were deleted from company servers yesterday," Zara explained. "Fortunately, I maintained backups as part of my due diligence before acquiring majority ownership." The room fell silent as board members digested the information. Richard's attorney attempted to interject, but Wei Zhang raised a hand to silence him. "Let her finish." Zara continued methodically, presenting evidence of the airport detention, the coordinated effort between Stephanie and Richard, and finally, the offshore accounts linking discrimination settlements to Margaret Whitfield's family. Investments. "This isn't about one incident," Zara concluded. "It's about a systematic pattern of discrimination protected by senior leadership for their financial benefit. When confronted with an owner who wouldn't perpetuate this system, they attempted a corporate coup. Margaret Whitfield, who had maintained aristocratic composure throughout, finally broke her silence. These are outrageous accusations from an inexperienced girl playing with inherited money. I've supported this airline for 20 years through my family investments." "Interesting you should mention family," Zara replied calmly, clicking to a new slide showing family connections. "Your nephew Richard carefully concealed your relationship from the board, didn't he? Just as he concealed that Stephanie Walsh is his former sister-in-law. 3 people connected by family ties, all working together to maintain control of Skyline's corporate culture." Richard stood abruptly. "This is character assassination. My family connections have nothing to do with—" "Sit down, Richard," Peterson ordered sharply. "Ms. Johnson has the floor." For the next 30 minutes, Zara outlined her vision for Skyline's future. Transparent discrimination reporting, leadership diversity reflecting customer demographics, training reforms, and new accountability structures. Throughout her presentation, she emphasized both moral imperatives and business advantages, demonstrating a nuanced understanding of aviation economics that clearly surprised many board members. In conclusion, she finished, you face a simple choice. Continue with leadership that covered up discrimination for personal profit, or embrace transformative change that will rebuild our reputation and create sustainable growth. The boardroom sarimos erupted into overlapping conversations, with Richard attempting to regain control. This is absurd. She's 19 years old. The operational complexities alone. I built an algorithm that saved this airline $40 million in fuel costs last year, Zara interrupted. Age reflects time, not capability. And I'm not proposing to run daily operations alone. That's why we have experienced executives. What I'm changing is the culture that protected discrimination instead of passengers and employees. The debate intensified as board members took sides. Two of Richard's supporters began wavering as the evidence mounted. Peterson called for a brief recess before the final vote, and the room cleared except for core participants. During this break, Richard approached Zara directly for the first time, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're doing. This industry will eat you alive. I've survived 3 airline bankruptcies, 2 federal investigations, and countless boardroom coups. You won't last 6 months. Zara met his gaze steadily. The difference between us, Richard, is that I don't need to survive. I need to change things. You've spent your career protecting a system. I'm here to transform it. When the board reconvened, Peterson called for the vote. The outcome would determine not just leadership, but the direction of the company for years to come. On the matter of executive authority and corporate governance, Peterson announced formally, the board will now vote. The result was initially deadlocked, 6 votes supporting Richard's continued leadership, 6 supporting Zara's rightful control. All eyes turned to Peterson for the tie-breaking vote. The chairman removed his glasses slowly. In 30 years of corporate governance, I've never seen evidence of misconduct this clear or this disturbing. He paused, looking directly at Richard. My vote is for Ms. Johnson's reinstatement as controlling shareholder with full authority. Richard's facade finally shattered. This is corporate suicide. You're handing a billion-dollar company to a child because she played the race card. She'll destroy everything we've built. Mr. Harmon, Peterson's voice cracked like a whip. Control yourself. But Richard was beyond restraint. You think discrimination is the issue? This is business. We give the customers what they want. Middle America doesn't want to see certain people in first class. That's market reality, not racism. The outburst hung in the air, damning in its naked honesty. Board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Even Richard's attorneys winced. I believe that outburst clarifies matters, Peterson said quietly. Security will escort Mr. Harmon from the premises. His company access is terminated, effective immediately. As security personnel approached, Richard pointed at Zara, his voice shaking with rage. This isn't over. You think you've won? I built this airline. I have friends in regulation, in finance, in places you don't even know exist. You've made an enemy you can't afford, little girl. The threat lingered in the boardroom long after Richard was removed. Margaret Whitfield followed shortly after, her aristocratic poise intact, but her influence shattered. Zara absorbed the reality of her victory with clear-eyed assessment of the challenges ahead. She had won the battle for control, but Richard's parting words weren't empty threats. The war for Skyline's future and her vision of an airline free from systemic discrimination had only just begun. The victory in the boardroom proved fleeting as Zara faced the full force of a coordinated public relations counterattack. By noon, carefully crafted narratives began appearing across traditional and social media platforms, all carrying subtle variations of the same message. Skyline Airlines was under attack by inexperienced activist leadership. From the temporary command center established in Vivian's downtown condo, Zara monitored the unfolding disaster on multiple screens. Conservative business programs featured economists questioning whether social justice agendas belonged in airline management. Industry publications suddenly ran profiles of Richard Harmon, portraying him as an aviation veteran unfairly pushed aside. Social media influencers received mysterious sponsorships to discuss the dangers of inexperience in critical industries. "They planned this," Vivian observed, scrolling through identical talking points appearing across different platforms. These narratives were prepared before Richard lost the vote. Zara nodded grimly. He expected to win in the boardroom, but prepared for defeat just in case. Classic Richard, always having a backup plan. The PR assault was only the beginning. By early afternoon, the airline's customer service lines were flooded with complaints from frequent flyers, threatening to cancel their loyalty memberships over politics in the boarding process. Investigation revealed most calls originated from the same 3 area codes, suggesting an organized campaign rather than genuine customer concern. Simultaneously, anonymous sources began leaking concerns about Zara's qualifications to aviation industry journalists. Her algorithm, previously celebrated for its innovation, was suddenly described as untested and potentially risky. Questions arose about her educational background, personal life, and family connections, all framed to undermine her legitimacy. "They're trying to rattle you," Jason advised on a secure call. "Standard tactics to force emotional responses they can use against you." But the campaign took a darker turn by evening. Zara's personal phone, email, and social media accounts were flooded with racist messages and death threats. Her college dormitory received a false bomb threat, forcing evacuation. Anonymous accounts published her private address and encouraged concerned citizens to make their opinions known. "This isn't just PR anymore," Zara said quietly, showing Vivian particularly graphic threats featuring her photograph modified with violent imagery. "This is intimidation." Security consultants swept the condo for bugs and established protection protocols, but the psychological toll mounted. Every notification, every ring of the phone, carried potential new attacks. The next morning brought fresh challenges. 3 former Skyline employees gave coordinated interviews, claiming they had been forced out for questioning diversity initiatives. All 3 had received substantial settlements during Richard's tenure. Their discrimination complaints mysteriously transformed into grievances against inclusion efforts. Stephanie Walsh, continuing her media tour, evolved her story yet again. Now portraying herself as a whistleblower, she claimed Zara had orchestrated the entire incident to seize control. "She targeted me specifically," Stephanie told a sympathetic morning show host. "I'm just a scapegoat in her corporate takeover plan." The most damaging blow came from Margaret Whitfield, who leveraged her social connections to place stories, questioning Skyline's financial stability under radical new leadership. These whispers, amplified through business networks, sent the stock price plummeting another 15%. Zara paced the condo, frustration mounting. "We're playing defense while they control the narrative. Every response makes us look reactive, rather than proactive." Vivian nodded thoughtfully. "That's because we're fighting on their terrain. Corporation versus individual. Experience versus youth. Tradition versus change. We need to reframe the entire conversation." Before they could develop this strategy, Zara's secure phone rang with alarming news. An executive assistant loyal to Vivian had discovered a security breach at Zara's San Francisco apartment. Unknown individuals had entered using professional equipment, leaving no obvious evidence except microscopic disturbances detected by the advanced security system Zara had installed. "Corporate espionage," the security consultant concluded after investigating. "They were looking for compromising information, either to use against you or to help build their counter-narrative." The violation of her personal space struck Zara, harder than the public attacks. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. Maybe Richard's right. Maybe I'm not prepared for this level of warfare. Vivian placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "This is exactly why you're needed. Richard fights dirty because he represents a system that can't win on merit or morality. They're escalating because you're winning." The conversation was interrupted by breaking news alerts across all screens. Federal authorities had announced a preliminary investigation into potential securities violations and discriminatory practices at Skyline Airlines. The company's stock instantly dropped another 10%. This should be good news, Zara noted, confused by the market reaction. It validates everything we've been saying. Look closer at the wording. Vivian pointed to specific phrases in the announcement. This investigation targets current and former leadership equally. Richard has friends in regulatory agencies. He's making sure if he goes down, he takes you with him. Jason's legal team confirmed this assessment hours later. They're creating a narrative where both sides are equally problematic, positioning Richard as the experienced leader who might have cut corners but kept the airline profitable, versus the inexperienced activist causing financial harm. By day's end, the coordinated pressure campaign culminated in a legal bombshell. Richard filed a defamation lawsuit against Zara personally, seeking $50 million in damages for irreparable harm to professional reputation. More alarmingly, he simultaneously filed for a temporary restraining order, barring her from Skyline premises or communication with employees while litigation proceeded. It's a delaying tactic, Jason explained during an emergency strategy session. He knows the case is weak, but corporate litigation can drag on for years. Meanwhile, the TRO would effectively prevent you from leading the company you own. Zara studied the legal documents, noting the judge assigned to the case. Judge Raymond Whitfield. Any relation to Margaret? Jason's expression confirmed her suspicion. Her cousin. Richard venue shopped until he found a favorable judicial assignment. The hits kept coming. Late that night, as exhaustion set in, news broke that credit rating agencies had placed Skyline on negative watch, citing leadership uncertainty and potential regulatory challenges. Major corporate clients began postponing contract renewals, creating immediate cash flow concerns. Alone in her temporary bedroom, Zara finally allowed tears of frustration. The system she fought was vast and interconnected, with Richard pulling strings through networks established over decades. For every public battle she won, 3 more erupted on different fronts. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Watching your company collapse? This can end when you resign. Consider it a learning experience. Next time, stay in your lane. The message carried no signature, but Richard's voice echoed in every word. Have you ever faced powerful people trying to silence you? Comment number 1 if you think Zara should fight this public relations war by exposing Richard's dirty tactics. Comment number 2 if you believe she should focus on running the airline well and let results speak for themselves. And if you've ever been targeted for speaking truth to power, hit that like button and subscribe to show solidarity with those fighting for equality in corporate America. The battle for Skyline Airlines has moved from the boardroom to the court of public opinion, with Richard proving that losing official power doesn't mean losing influence. Will Zara find a way to counter these sophisticated attacks? Can she protect herself from the escalating personal threats? And what evidence might turn the tide in this increasingly dangerous corporate war? The stakes keep rising as we continue this shocking true story. Dawn broke over San Francisco, illuminating the fog as it rolled between skyscrapers. Zara had barely slept, spending the night reviewing legal documents and strategizing with Jason's team via secure conference calls. The temporary restraining order hearing was scheduled for 9 that morning before Judge Raymond Whitfield, giving them precious little time to prepare a defense. The core of Richard's argument is fascinating in its audacity, Jason explained, as their car navigated morning traffic toward the courthouse. He's claiming your statements about discrimination at Skyline constitute defamation because they've damaged the company's reputation and stock value. But they're true statements backed by evidence, Zara replied, reviewing their counter-arguments on a tablet. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, which is exactly why we need to focus on admissibility of evidence. Jason's expression tightened. Richard's legal team has filed motions to exclude the backup server records, claiming they were obtained through unauthorized access to company systems. The irony wasn't lost on Zara. So they delete the official records, then claim my backups are inadmissible. Welcome to corporate litigation, Jason said grimly. It's rarely about justice and frequently about procedural advantages. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters and protesters holding competing signs. Some demanded justice for Skyline employees, while others proclaimed experience over activism and keep politics out of airlines. The division reflected Richard's successful framing of the conflict as ideological rather than ethical. Inside, the courtroom atmosphere crackled with tension. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by 5 attorneys from Prescott and Winthrop, one of the nation's most expensive corporate firms. He appeared immaculately groomed and well-rested, projecting calm confidence despite yesterday's boardroom outburst. Judge Whitfield entered, his resemblance to Margaret unmistakable in the aristocratic tilt of his chin and cold blue eyes. From his first procedural rulings, his bias became clear, excluding 3 of Zara's key witnesses for redundancy, while allowing all of Richard's to remain on the list. "Your Honor," Jason objected, rising to his full height, "excluding testimony from discrimination victims while permitting character witnesses for Mr. Harmon creates a procedural imbalance that—" "Counsel," Judge Whitfield interrupted, "this is a hearing on a temporary restraining order regarding company access, not an investigation into alleged discrimination. Please confine your arguments to relevant matters." The pattern continued throughout the morning. Richard's team painted him as the experienced steward of a complex organization, temporarily sidelined by a vindictive teenage investor exploiting one unfortunate customer service incident. They emphasized the falling stock price and canceled contracts as evidence that Zara's leadership threatened the company's very existence. When Jason attempted to introduce evidence of Richard's offshore accounts and connection to covered-up discrimination complaints, Judge Whitfield sustained objections on grounds of relevance and admissibility. At each ruling, Richard's expression remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. By noon, the outcome seemed predetermined. Judge Whitfield issued a temporary restraining order barring Zara from entering Skyline premises, contacting employees, or exercising operational control for 10 business days pending further hearings. "This is temporary relief only," the judge intoned as if offering consolation. "The court recognizes Ms. Johnson's ownership stake, but must protect the company from potential irreparable harm during this period of transition and litigation." Outside the courtroom, Richard offered brief comments to assembled media. "I'm gratified the court recognized the need for experienced leadership during this difficult time. My only concern has always been Skyline's stability and the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on sound management." On the courthouse steps, Zara maintained her composure despite the devastating setback. "This temporary order changes nothing about the underlying facts. Discrimination occurred at Skyline, was systematically covered up, and those responsible will be held accountable." Back at their temporary headquarters, the strategy session took on new urgency. With Zara legally barred from direct involvement, for 10 business days, Richard would have free rein to consolidate power and potentially destroy more evidence. "We need a 2-pronged approach," Vivian advised. "First, appeal the TRO to a higher court immediately. Second, build a parallel case that doesn't depend on your direct involvement with the company." Jason nodded in agreement. "I've already spoken with the attorneys representing former employees with discrimination complaints. They're willing to consolidate into a class action lawsuit naming Richard, Stephanie, and Margaret personally, not just the airline." "That circumvents the TRO entirely," Zara realized. "I can assist their case as a witness without violating Judge Whitfield's order about company operations." As they developed this strategy, an unexpected opportunity emerged. Stephanie Walsh's attorney contacted Jason requesting a private meeting. Apparently, Stephanie had become increasingly uncomfortable with Richard's aggressive tactics and worried she was being set up as the primary scapegoat. "She's offering to flip," Jason explained after the preliminary discussion. "In exchange for immunity from civil liability, she'll provide testimony about Richard's systematic discrimination policies, including recorded conversations where he explicitly instructed cabin crew to prioritize traditional passengers in first class." "Traditional passengers?" Zara questioned. "His code for white customers," Vivian translated grimly, "especially older ones with apparent wealth." The potential bombshell testimony from Stephanie could shatter Richard's carefully constructed public image, but Zara hesitated. "Can we trust her? She's already changed her story twice for the media." "That's why we're insisting on reviewing her evidence before making any deal," Jason assured her. If she has actual recordings, they speak for themselves regardless of her credibility issues. While this promising development unfolded, Margaret Whitfield launched her own counteroffensive. Using political connections cultivated through decades of strategic donations, she began pressuring the federal agencies investigating Skyline. Congressional allies suddenly questioned the political motivations behind the investigation, and the lead federal prosecutor found himself reassigned to a different department without explanation. The message was clear. The Whitfield family influence extended beyond business into government regulatory bodies. Richard might have lost the boardroom vote, but the broader system remained tilted in his favor. For Zara, the most painful aspect was watching Skyline employees suffer amid the power struggle. Uncertainty about leadership led to operational confusion. Pilots and flight attendants faced uncomfortable questions from passengers about the viral video and subsequent controversy. Customer satisfaction scores plummeted, and competitors began targeting Skyline's corporate accounts with aggressive discounts. Richard's willing to damage the entire company to maintain control, Zara observed, studying the latest operational reports smuggled to her by loyal employees despite the restraining order. He'd rather rule over ruins than lose his position. The legal team worked around the clock preparing their appeal of Judge Whitfield's order, but realistic assessment suggested the process would take at least a week, precious time during which Richard could continue consolidating power. They needed a breakthrough, and quickly. It came from an unexpected source. A junior attorney at Prescott and Winthrop contacted Jason anonymously, troubled by his firm's tactics in the case. The whistleblower revealed that Richard's legal team possessed internal memoranda acknowledging the validity of discrimination claims, but had deliberately withheld them from discovery. "This is textbook legal malpractice," Jason explained, reviewing the evidence. "If proven, it's grounds for immediate dismissal of their case and possible sanctions against the attorneys involved." They prepared emergency motions to compel production of the withheld documents, but remained wary of bringing them before Judge Whitfield, whose bias had been abundantly clear. Instead, they petitioned for reconsideration by a different judge, citing evidence of potential conflicts of interest between Whitfield and the parties involved. As these legal maneuvers played out, Richard made his most aggressive move yet. Using the temporary operational authority granted by the restraining order, he initiated termination proceedings against employees who had publicly supported Zara or testified about discrimination experiences. Though carefully framed as restructuring for operational efficiency, the pattern was unmistakable: systematic removal of potential witnesses and allies. "He's literally purging the company," Vivian reported after receiving frantic calls from targeted employees. "People who've been with Skyline for decades are being escorted out with no warning." The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the 10-day mark approached. Richard's team filed for an extension of the restraining order, citing ongoing corporate instability, while simultaneously releasing press statements about stabilization efforts under his interim leadership. The contradiction went largely unchallenged in media accounts, which continued portraying the situation as a clash between experience and activism, rather than accountability versus discrimination. For Zara, the cumulative stress took its toll. Constant security concerns, legal pressure, media scrutiny, and the weight of responsibility for thousands of employees' livelihoods created almost unbearable pressure. She maintained public composure, but private moments revealed the human cost of the battle she'd undertaken. "I never wanted to be a corporate warrior," she confessed to Vivian during a rare quiet moment. "I just wanted to create an airline where people like my parents could work without facing discrimination, where passengers would be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance." "That simple goal threatens everything Richard represents," Vivian replied softly. "Systems of inequality don't yield power willingly." As the legal clock ticked down toward a crucial hearing that could either reinstate Zara's control or extend her exile from the company she owned, both sides prepared their ultimate strategies. For Richard, that meant leveraging every connection, exploiting every procedural advantage, and maintaining the public narrative of experienced leadership versus youthful inexperience. For Zara, it meant something altogether different: truth, presented with such clarity and force that even rigged systems couldn't deny it. The final battle wouldn't be won through procedural maneuvers or backroom deals, but through public exposure of the rot at Skyline's core. With 3 days remaining before the decisive hearing, Zara received a cryptic message from an internal ally still positioned within Skyline's executive offices. Margaret left her personal phone in meeting room. Password saved on sticky note. Downloading contents now. This changes everything. The clock was ticking, and the final confrontation loomed. Richard had decades of experience, unlimited resources, and a system designed to protect people like him. Zara had truth, technology, and determination to transform not just one company, but an entire industry's approach to equality. The question remained, would it be enough? Vivian Blackwood stared at the phone's contents in stunned silence. After nearly 40 years in corporate America, very little shocked her anymore. But the evidence recovered from Margaret Whitfield's carelessly discarded device left even her momentarily speechless. "This is comprehensive," she finally said, scrolling through hundreds of text messages, voice memos, and encrypted communications between Margaret, Richard, and a network of allies throughout the aviation industry and regulatory agencies. Zara leaned closer, absorbing the implications. They weren't just covering up discrimination at Skyline. They were actively coordinating similar practices across multiple airlines. An industry-wide conspiracy, Jason confirmed, making notes for immediate legal action. Price fixing for discrimination settlements, shared blacklists of employees who filed complaints, coordinated media strategies to discredit diversity initiatives. The phone contained the blueprint of a system spanning decades, meticulously documented by Margaret Whitfield, who apparently never imagined her records falling into adversaries' hands. Most damning were voice memos where Richard explicitly outlined their strategy for removing Zara from power, including the planned detainment at the airport and subsequent media manipulation. "This completely validates your experience," Jason noted, "and proves premeditation. It transforms the narrative from one isolated incident to systematic corruption at the highest levels." While they processed this game-changing evidence, Richard and Margaret executed their most audacious move yet. Using the operational authority temporarily granted by the restraining order, Richard called an emergency shareholder meeting with deliberately abbreviated notice, technically legal, but designed to minimize participation from smaller investors who might support Zara. The meeting agenda contained a single item, a vote to adopt a leadership stability provision requiring executive experience for anyone exercising operational control over the airline. The provision wouldn't affect Zara's ownership stake, but would permanently prevent her from active management, effectively neutralizing her ability to implement reforms. "It's a corporate version of changing voting laws," Vivian explained when they discovered the maneuver. "They can't challenge your ownership directly, so they're changing the rules about what ownership means." The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 9 the following morning, precisely when Judge Whitfield would be hearing arguments about extending the restraining order against Zara. The timing was no coincidence. Richard had ensured she couldn't be in 2 places at once. "We need to split up," Zara decided. "Jason, you handle the court hearing with most of the legal team. Present Margaret's phone evidence and push for immediate dissolution of the restraining order. Vivian and I will go to the shareholder meeting." "You can't," Jason reminded her. "The restraining order explicitly prohibits you from attending company functions or contacting employees. If you violate it, Richard wins automatically. He'll have you held in contempt." "Then we wait outside until the last possible moment," Zara countered. "The second you get the order lifted, we enter, not a minute before." The strategy depended on perfect timing and communication between teams. If the restraining order remained in place, Richard and Margaret would secure their leadership stability provision before Zara could legally object. If Jason succeeded but couldn't notify them immediately, the same outcome would occur. As they finalized preparations, another unexpected development emerged. Stephanie Walsh, after reviewing the evidence against Richard, made her decision. She would testify truthfully about the systematic discrimination at Skyline and her role in targeting Zara during the flight. "She's terrified," her attorney confided during final witness preparation. Richard has threatened her career, her reputation, even her personal safety. But seeing the extent of the conspiracy on Margaret's phone convinced her she's on the wrong side of history. The night before the dual confrontations, Zara barely slept. The upcoming day would determine not just her future, but that of thousands of employees, and potentially the standards for an entire industry. Around 3 a.m, she found Vivian similarly awake, reviewing documents in the condo's kitchen. "You should rest," Vivian advised, though her own exhaustion was evident. "I keep thinking about my parents," Zara replied, accepting the cup of tea Vivian offered. "My father applied for promotion 11 times at Skyline. 11 times he was passed over for less qualified white candidates. My mother endured daily microaggressions until she finally quit. They face this system alone. Tomorrow, we have a chance to dismantle it completely." Morning arrived with tense anticipation. The legal team synchronized watches and tested secure communication channels. Jason departed for the courthouse with the evidence from Margaret's phone carefully preserved and authenticated. Zara and Vivian headed toward Skyline headquarters, where they would wait nearby until, hopefully, the restraining order was lifted. At the courthouse, proceedings began ominously. Judge Whitfield appeared irritated by the emergency motions Jason had filed, dismissing them as last-minute delay tactics. When Jason attempted to introduce the new evidence from Margaret's phone, the judge initially refused to consider it, claiming it fell outside the scope of the restraining order hearing. "Your Honor," Jason persisted, uncharacteristic edge in his voice. "This evidence directly proves that the restraining order was obtained through fraud upon the court. Mr. Harmon's sworn testimony about his actions conflicts directly with his own recorded statements." After tense procedural arguments, Judge Whitfield reluctantly admitted the evidence with visible reluctance. As the recordings played in the courtroom, Richard's face darkened. His own voice, preserved in Margaret's meticulous records, described the planned detention of Zara at the airport as necessary containment of the situation, and outlined media strategies to undermine her authority based specifically on her race and age. Most damning was a recorded conversation between Richard and Judge Whitfield himself, discussing the case before it was officially assigned to his courtroom. The clear evidence of judicial impropriety transformed the atmosphere instantly. "In light of this evidence," Judge Whitfield stated stiffly, recusing himself from further proceedings, "this matter will be reassigned to Judge Chen for immediate consideration." Judge Lucy Chen, known for her strict procedural fairness, reviewed the evidence and reached her conclusion within 30 minutes. "The restraining order is dissolved, effective immediately. Mr. Harmon appears to have obtained it through misrepresentation and coordinated action with the previous judge, constituting a textbook case of fraud upon the court." Jason immediately called Zara with the news, but discovered their secure channel was experiencing interference. Whether technical failure or deliberate jamming remained unclear. His repeated attempts to reach her failed as the clock ticked toward the shareholder vote. At Skyline headquarters, Zara and Vivian waited in a coffee shop across the street, watching shareholders enter the building for the critical meeting. Margaret arrived with her legal team, followed minutes later by Richard, both projecting confidence despite the damning evidence being presented across town. "Something's wrong," Zara murmured, checking her phone again. Jason should have called by now. The meeting was scheduled to begin at 9. At 8:58, with no word from the legal team, they faced an impossible choice: respect the restraining order and lose the company, or violate it and risk legal consequences that could permanently damage Zara's position. "We have to move," Vivian decided, gathering her documents. "I'll go in first. You wait exactly 3 more minutes. If I text proceed, it means I've confirmed the order has been lifted and you can enter legally." Vivian crossed the street and entered the building, her executive credentials still active despite Richard's efforts to isolate Zara's allies. Inside the boardroom, she found the shareholder meeting already beginning, Richard having started proceedings 5 minutes early. Another procedural manipulation. "Before we vote," Richard was announcing smoothly, "I want to emphasize that this provision ensures Skyline's stability during a period of unnecessary turbulence. Ms. Johnson's ownership stake remains unchanged, but operational control requires Aviation experience that simply isn't acquired through technology investments. Vivian interrupted from the doorway. I believe the majority shareholder might have something to say about that, Richard. Ms. Johnson is legally prohibited from attending this meeting, Richard countered with practiced regret. And the proxy voting deadline passed yesterday. The proceedings will continue as scheduled. Outside, Zara's phone remained silent. No message from Jason. No proceed text from Vivian. The clock showed 9:02. In 1 minute, the vote would begin. In approximately 5 minutes, it would conclude, permanently altering Skyline's governance structure. Making her decision, Zara entered the building. Legal consequences seemed abstract compared to the immediate threat to everything she'd worked for. As she approached the boardroom doors, her phone finally chimed. A text from Jason, delayed by technical issues. Order lifted. Enter legally. Zara pushed open the boardroom doors just as Richard called for the vote. Conversation ceased instantly as all heads turned toward her unexpected entrance. Richard's confident expression faltered momentarily before recovering. Ms. Johnson, you are in violation of a legal restraining order. Security will escort you from the premises, and your contempt will be noted for further proceedings. The restraining order has been dissolved, Zara announced calmly, holding up her phone displaying Jason's message. Judge Chen ruled it was obtained through fraud upon the court. Additionally, Judge Whitfield has recused himself after evidence of improper coordination with you came to light. Richard's composure cracked visibly. That's impossible. The hearing just began. It concluded 20 minutes ago, Zara corrected, approaching the center of the room. And now, as majority shareholder of Skyline Airlines, I have an alternative proposal for consideration. The atmosphere shifted as Zara outlined her evidence, not just the discrimination on her flight, but the years of systematic abuses revealed through Margaret's phone. Shareholders listened with growing concern as the true extent of Richard and Margaret's actions became clear. Not just ethical violations, but potential criminal behavior that exposed the company to massive liability. The leadership stability provision isn't about experience, Zara concluded. It's about preventing accountability. Before voting, shareholders should consider whether supporting it makes them complicit in covering up documented discrimination and potential securities fraud. Richard attempted to regain control, his voice rising. This is absurd. We've built this airline into an industry leader. One incident on one flight doesn't negate decades of success. It wasn't one incident. A new voice interjected from the doorway. Stephanie Walsh entered, visibly nervous but determined. Her testimony had concluded at the courthouse, and Jason had sent her directly to the shareholder meeting. For the first time, she spoke without Richard's coaching or media handlers shaping her message. For 15 years, I followed directives about passenger treatment based on appearance, race, and perceived wealth, she stated clearly. Those directives came directly from Mr. Harmon, who instructed us to find pretext for removing passengers who didn't fit Skyline's preferred customer profile. What happened with Ms. Johnson wasn't an isolated incident. It was standard procedure. Richard lunged toward her, control finally shattering completely. You ungrateful. After everything we've done to protect you. Security personnel moved quickly, not to remove Zara or Stephanie, but to restrain Richard, whose threatening advance toward a witness had crossed a critical line. As they escorted him from the room, the remaining shareholders sat in stunned silence. Margaret Whitfield rose with aristocratic dignity. This meeting is clearly compromised by emotional theatrics. I move to adjourn until cooler heads prevail. Motion denied, Vivian countered immediately. The shareholder meeting will proceed according to bylaws, now with the majority shareholder rightfully present. What followed was not the vote Richard had planned, but an entirely different one proposed by Zara. Removal of Richard Harmon from all positions within the company, dissolution of the special privileges granted to Margaret's investment group, and establishment of an independent ethics committee with oversight of discrimination complaints. As the votes were counted, the outcome became clear. Shareholders, presented with evidence of potential criminal liability, chose self-preservation over loyalty to Richard's regime. The motion passed with 64% support, a clear mandate for transformation. Outside the boardroom, Zara found a moment of unexpected quiet amid the chaos. After weeks of relentless battle, the immediate crisis had passed. Richard had been removed, Margaret's influence neutralized, and control of Skyline secured. But the real work, transforming the company culture and addressing the damage done to employees and passengers, was just beginning. As she stood contemplating this challenge, a commotion at the building's entrance drew her attention. Federal agents were entering, led by investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The evidence from Margaret's phone had accelerated their investigation dramatically. Zara watched as they progressed through the lobby, warrant folders visible in their hands. The system that had protected Richard for decades was finally closing in, driven not by corporate power struggles but by the weight of law itself. The final confrontation hadn't ended exactly as either side expected. Richard's carefully constructed power base had collapsed not through Zara's ownership claims alone, but through his own documented actions and the courage of witnesses like Stephanie. What began as discrimination against one passenger had exposed corruption affecting thousands. As the federal agents disappeared into an elevator, Zara turned toward the executive offices that were now legitimately hers. The victory felt different than she had imagined, less triumphant, more sobering. The responsibility of transformation now rested squarely on her shoulders, along with the livelihoods of every Skyline employee. The hard work of rebuilding was about to begin. The Skyline Airlines executive boardroom had undergone a transformation since Zara officially assumed control. Gone was the dark mahogany table where power had been concentrated among a select few. In its place stood a circular arrangement with equal seating, symbolizing the cultural shift already underway. Digital screens displayed real-time company metrics alongside newly implemented discrimination complaint statistics, transparency replacing secrecy as operational philosophy. Today marked a pivotal moment. The presentation of complete findings from the independent investigation Zara had commissioned immediately after securing control. Former federal prosecutor Elena Vasquez, who had led the 3-week inquiry with a team of discrimination experts and forensic accountants, stood ready to share conclusions that would shape the company's future. "The investigation findings exceed even our worst expectations," Elena began, addressing the executive team and specially invited discrimination victims from throughout Skyline's history. "We've documented 347 cases of explicit racial discrimination over the past decade, with patterns suggesting thousands more unreported incidents." The presentation detailed a sophisticated system spanning every aspect of airline operations. Flight attendants received coded training about passenger value assessment based predominantly on race and perceived wealth. Gate agents were instructed to scrutinize certain passengers' tickets more closely than others. Promotion committees used evaluation criteria specifically designed to disadvantage non-white employees. "Most disturbing," Elena continued, displaying financial records, "is the dedicated fund established for quietly settling discrimination claims. Budgeted annually at $8 million, these settlements included aggressive non-disclosure agreements and often resulted in employment termination for complainants regardless of case merit." The documents revealed Margaret Whitfield's central role in designing this system. As a major investor with political connections, she had positioned herself as cultural guardian of the airline, ensuring it maintained what internal documents called its traditional passenger appeal, a euphemism for catering primarily to wealthy white customers. Richard's contribution had been operational implementation and enforcement. Voice recordings recovered from Margaret's phone captured him instructing department heads to maintain appropriate demographic balances in visible positions and to discourage certain passenger profiles through selective service adjustments. In legal terms, Elena concluded grimly, this constitutes a textbook civil rights conspiracy. The evidence supports criminal charges against both primary architects and numerous secondary participants. As the presentation concluded, silence filled the room. For many longtime employees witnessing the revelation, the evidence confirmed suspicions they'd harbored for years but couldn't prove individually. For others who had benefited from the system, It forced uncomfortable recognition of complicity. Zara allowed the moment to resonate before speaking. This isn't just Skyline's problem. We've found evidence of similar systems at 6 major competitors, orchestrated through industry associations and shared consultants. The patterns are nearly identical. She displayed communications showing how Richard and Margaret had shared their passenger management techniques through exclusive industry forums, creating common practices that disproportionately impacted minority travelers across multiple airlines. What had seemed like isolated incidents were actually manifestations of coordinated policy. Our response must be equally systematic, Zara continued. Starting today, we're implementing comprehensive reforms in hiring, promotion, customer service protocols, and complaint resolution. Every policy will be examined for disparate impact and revised accordingly. The ambitious plan included mandatory unconscious bias training for all employees, anonymous complaint channels with independent investigation, demographic auditing of passenger service quality, and promotion criteria focused exclusively on measurable performance metrics. Most significantly, Zara announced the creation of a public-facing dashboard reporting discrimination statistics quarterly, radical transparency unprecedented in the industry. As the meeting progressed to implementation details, an urgent message arrived for Zara's legal team. Federal prosecutors had filed formal charges against Richard Harmon and Margaret Whitfield for conspiracy against civil rights, wire fraud related to discrimination settlements, and securities violations for misrepresenting company practices to investors. The news spread quickly throughout the building. For many employees who had suffered under the previous regime, the charges represented long-delayed accountability. For those who had quietly enabled the system, they triggered anxiety about potential personal exposure. Amid this tense atmosphere, Stephanie Walsh requested a meeting with Zara. Since her pivotal testimony at the shareholder meeting, Stephanie had been on administrative leave, her future with the company uncertain. Now she sat across from the young executive, composure masking, obvious nervousness. "I know I don't deserve consideration," Stephanie began hesitantly. "I participated in discrimination that hurt countless passengers. There's no excuse for my actions." "You're right," Zara agreed, neither hostile nor particularly sympathetic. "You actively discriminated against passengers based on race, including me." Stephanie nodded, accepting the direct assessment. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the opportunity to help fix what I helped break. I know the system intimately, the coded language, the training techniques, the ways discrimination was disguised as customer service. That knowledge could be valuable in dismantling similar practices." The proposal was unexpected, but pragmatic. Stephanie's insider perspective could indeed accelerate reform efforts. Still, Zara considered carefully before responding. "You'd work with the Ethics Oversight Committee in an advisory capacity only," she finally decided. "No passenger contact, no supervisory authority. Your compensation would reflect that limited role. Most importantly, you'd participate in a public accountability process, speaking candidly about past practices so we can educate the industry about how discrimination becomes systemized." The terms were stringent but fair, a path to redemption through genuine contribution rather than simple punishment. Stephanie accepted immediately, recognizing the opportunity as more than she could have reasonably expected. As this conversation concluded, another unfolded in federal court, where Richard Harmon faced arraignment on multiple charges. His carefully cultivated image had collapsed completely. Television cameras captured him entering the courthouse alongside Margaret Whitfield, their former aristocratic confidence replaced by visible strain. Richard had rejected initial plea deal offers, insisting on fighting the charges. His defense strategy quickly became clear through statements from his attorney. Blame Stephanie Walsh as a rogue employee, portray systematic discrimination as isolated incidents, and characterize Margaret's detailed records as misinterpreted business practices. The weakness of this approach became apparent when prosecutors revealed their witness list. Beyond Stephanie, dozens of former Skyline employees had come forward following news of the federal investigation. Each brought individual experiences that, collectively, formed an irrefutable pattern. Even more damaging, 3 of Richard's fellow executives had accepted immunity deals in exchange for testimony about how the discriminatory systems operated at leadership levels. Margaret, the pragmatist, pursued a different strategy. Through her attorneys, she initiated back-channel discussions about potential cooperation. While maintaining public solidarity with Richard, she privately explored options for minimizing her potential sentence by providing information about industry-wide practices she had helped establish. This development created fresh challenges for Zara. Federal prosecutors sought her cooperation in building cases against other airlines, using evidence from Skyline's internal investigation. While committed to industry-wide reform, she hesitated to position her company as a government informant against competitors, concerned about potential business implications. The dilemma crystallized during a strategy session with her expanded executive team, which now included several respected industry veterans alongside younger, diverse talent. Legally, we have no obligation to volunteer evidence against other airlines, noted Martin Chen, the newly appointed chief legal officer. We can focus exclusively on reforming Skyline. But ethically, countered Amara Washington, head of the newly created Passenger Advocacy Division. If we know discrimination is happening systematically elsewhere and remain silent, aren't we perpetuating the very problems we're fighting internally? The debate continued until Vivian offered a characteristically elegant solution. We create an industry consortium focused on anti-discrimination best practices. We share our reforms, metrics, and methods openly, not as accusations against competitors, but as a new standard for the entire industry. Airlines can join voluntarily or explain to the public why they won't. The approach was quintessentially Vivian, strategic pressure through positive incentives rather than direct confrontation. Zara approved it immediately, recognizing that lasting change would require transformation beyond Skyline alone. As these corporate strategies developed, the personal toll of recent events became increasingly evident in private moments. Despite her public composure, Zara struggled with the emotional aftermath of discrimination, threats, and relentless pressure. Being proven right offered little comfort against the reality that systems designed to exclude people like her remained deeply entrenched throughout American business. Jason Miller, whose legal representation had evolved into genuine friendship, noticed her subdued mood during a preparation session for upcoming congressional testimony. "You've achieved more in a month than most activists accomplish in decades," he observed. "Why do I sense you're not celebrating?" Zara considered the question before answering thoughtfully. "Because winning the battle isn't the same as winning the war. Richard and Margaret are facing consequences, but they're symptoms of a much larger problem. The same systems that protected them exist in every industry, every institution. For every discriminatory leader exposed, dozens remain in power." "True," Jason acknowledged. "But systems change through accumulated pressure points. What happened at Skyline isn't isolated anymore. It's become a national conversation about corporate accountability for discrimination. That's how transformation begins." The conversation was interrupted by breaking news alerts. Richard Harmon had suffered an apparent medical episode during a court hearing. Early reports suggested a stress-induced cardiac event, serious but not life-threatening. For a man whose identity was built on projecting strength and control, the physical collapse seemed symbolically appropriate, his body manifesting the pressure his actions had created. As media coverage intensified, focusing on Richard's health rather than his alleged crimes, Zara recognized the narrative shift that often protected powerful figures. Conversations about systemic discrimination risked being replaced by sympathetic portrayals of a distinguished businessman under pressure. Taking control of the narrative, Zara scheduled a press conference focused not on Richard's situation, but on Skyline's forward-looking reforms. Standing before assembled media, she presented concrete policy changes already implemented, preliminary results showing improved employee satisfaction across demographic groups, and the company's commitment to transparent accountability. "What happened on my flight wasn't about one flight attendant or one passenger," she emphasized, steering attention back to substantive issues. "It reflected systematic policies that harmed thousands of travelers and employees. Our focus remains on transforming those systems, regardless of the status of individual legal proceedings." The disciplined messaging worked. News coverage gradually shifted from Richard's personal drama back to the broader implications of Skyline's transformation. Industry publications began examining similar practices at other airlines, often finding patterns that mirrored those exposed at Skyline. Meanwhile, shareholders who had initially feared Zara's leadership would damage the company financially received surprising news. After an initial stock price decline, Skyline shares had stabilized and begun recovering as the company's ethical reforms generated positive publicity and customer goodwill. The destruction Richard had predicted was failing to materialize. Most significant was the response from employees. As discriminatory systems were dismantled and replaced with merit-based processes, workplace satisfaction scores rose dramatically, particularly among previously marginalized groups. Operational metrics improved as employee engagement increased, challenging the cynical assumption that diversity and performance existed in opposition. These positive developments culminated in a pivotal moment when federal prosecutors called Zara to review their completed case against Richard and Margaret. The evidence had grown far beyond the original flight incident, encompassing hundreds of discriminatory actions spanning decades. Based on testimony and financial records, the lead prosecutor explained, we're adding charges related to civil rights conspiracy, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. The potential sentences now exceed 20 years, if convicted on all counts. The severity reflected not just the discrimination itself, but the elaborate systems created to conceal it and punish those who reported it. What Richard and Margaret had dismissed as standard industry practices had been recognized for what they truly were: calculated violations of fundamental civil rights protections. As Zara left the federal building, she encountered an unexpected figure: Margaret Whitfield, accompanied by her legal team, apparently concluding a cooperation agreement with prosecutors. Their eyes met briefly across the lobby. The aging aristocrat, who had helped design discriminatory systems facing the young black woman who had exposed them. Margaret's gaze held neither remorse nor recognition, only cold calculation about her diminishing options. For her, discrimination had never been personal, merely a business strategy to maximize profits by catering to certain customers at others' expense. That clinical approach had finally met its reckoning in the form of federal charges that even her considerable influence couldn't dispel. The moment passed without acknowledgement from either woman. Zara continued toward the exit while Margaret disappeared into a conference room with prosecutors, each moving along paths that had intersected dramatically but would now permanently diverge. Back at Skyline headquarters, final preparations were underway for a company-wide address where Zara would present the complete evidence gathered during the investigation. Employees at all levels would learn exactly how discrimination had been institutionalized throughout the airline's operations, from hiring to promotion to passenger service. The presentation represented a calculated risk. Exposing the full extent of past practices might initially damage company morale and public perception. However, Zara remained convinced that genuine transformation required unflinching honesty about previous failures. "We can't build something new while pretending the old system was just a few bad actors," she explained to concerned board members. "Everyone needs to understand how discrimination became standard operating procedure so we can dismantle it completely." When the time came, Zara stood before assembled executives, managers, and employee representatives, with thousands more watching via secure video stream. She began not with corporate platitudes about moving forward, but with stark documentation of how discrimination had been systematically implemented and rewarded. "The evidence shows this wasn't accidental," she stated clearly, displaying internal memos with coded language about passenger demographics and cabin culture. These policies were deliberately created, carefully documented, and methodically enforced throughout the company. The presentation included audio recordings of Richard instructing department heads to maintain appropriate passenger profiles, and Margaret discussing how to identify undesirable customers during the boarding process. Most shocking to many, longtime employees were transcripts showing how racism had been embedded in evaluation criteria for everything from hiring to promotion. As damning evidence accumulated on screen after screen, the atmosphere in the room transformed. Initial defensiveness gave way to uncomfortable recognition, then to genuine shock as the comprehensive nature of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't isolated prejudice, but an elaborate system designed at the highest levels to institutionalize discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability. Zara concluded not with accusations but with accountability. Everyone in this room either participated in these systems, benefited from them, or was harmed by them. Some of you knew and remained silent. Others suspected but lacked evidence. Many suffered consequences for challenging the status quo. We all share responsibility for ensuring these systems are dismantled permanently. The response wasn't immediate applause or obvious relief, but thoughtful silence. Exactly what Zara had hoped for. Real transformation couldn't begin with easy absolution, but with honest acknowledgement of uncomfortable truths. As Zara opened the floor for questions, the first came from Carlos Rivera, the flight attendant who had witnessed her discrimination firsthand. "After everything we've learned," he asked, visibly emotional, "how do we rebuild trust with passengers who experience discrimination under these policies? How do we make amends?" The question captured the essential challenge facing Skyline. Not just changing future policies but accounting for past harms. Zara's answer would set the tone for the company's approach to reconciliation and healing. "We start by acknowledging the specific harm done," she replied thoughtfully. "Not with generic corporate apologies, but with direct recognition of how our practices affected real people. Then we implement concrete changes that demonstrate genuine commitment to transformation. Words matter, but actions prove sincerity." The discussion continued for hours, extending well beyond the scheduled time frame, as employees gradually found courage to share experiences, ask difficult questions, and offer insights from diverse perspectives. What had begun as a presentation evolved into a company-wide dialogue about race, power, and institutional change. Precisely the conversation Skyline had avoided for decades. Meanwhile, across town in a federal courthouse, Richard Harmon faced a critical hearing following his ATO medical episode. Having recovered sufficiently to appear, he sat beside his attorneys as prosecutors presented the expanded case against him, including new evidence uncovered through Margaret's cooperation. The courtroom fell silent as prosecutors played recordings of Richard explicitly instructing managers to create pretexts for removing certain passengers from premium cabins, using coded language about passenger quality and cabin atmosphere. His own voice methodically explained how to document these removals to appear non-discriminatory while achieving discriminatory outcomes. Most damaging was evidence showing Richard had personally intervened to destroy discrimination complaints filed by employees, including ordering the termination of whistleblowers under manufactured performance concerns. The systematic nature of these actions elevated them from problematic practices to potential criminal conspiracy. When the judge asked how he pleaded to the expanded charges, Richard's trademark confidence finally crumbled completely. After brief consultation with attorneys, he uttered a single word that represented the collapse of decades of power and privilege: guilty. The plea agreement, hastily negotiated during court recess, would spare Richard maximum penalties in exchange for cooperation identifying industry-wide discriminatory practices. His sentencing would be delayed pending this cooperation, but significant prison time remained inevitable given the severity and scope of admitted offenses. News of Richard's guilty plea spread rapidly through Skyline's offices, adding profound weight to the ongoing company discussions about discrimination. The man who had embodied the airline's leadership for decades had admitted to orchestrating systematic civil rights violations, confirming what many employees had experienced but couldn't previously prove. For Zara, the plea represented not personal vindication but institutional accountability. Richard's admission transformed her experience from individual complaint to acknowledged pattern, validating not just her specific incident, but countless others who had faced similar treatment without her resources or position to fight back. Later that evening, as the extended company meeting finally concluded, Zara found a moment of solitude in her new office. The space, once Richard's domain of dark wood and masculine power symbols, had been redesigned with transparent glass walls and sustainable materials, physically representing the transparency she was implementing throughout the company. Sitting At her desk, she reviewed reports from the day's events: Richard's guilty plea, Margaret's cooperation agreement, the company-wide presentation, and preliminary feedback from employees. Together, they represented the culmination of a battle that had begun with one discriminatory incident on one flight, but had exposed corruption affecting thousands. A soft knock interrupted her reflection. Vivian entered, carrying 2 cups of tea and the wisdom of decades navigating corporate America as a black woman in leadership. "You've accomplished something remarkable," Vivian noted, taking a seat across from Zara. "Not just exposing what happened, but creating space for genuine transformation." "It doesn't feel finished," Zara admitted. "Richard pleading guilty, the company acknowledging discrimination. These are just first steps. The systems that protected him exist throughout business, government, education. How do we address something so embedded in American institutions?" Vivian considered this fundamental question before responding. "One company at a time, one policy at a time, one conversation at a time. Systems of inequality weren't built in a day, and they won't be dismantled in one either. But what you've done at Skyline creates a template others can follow." As they discussed next steps, Zara's phone chimed with breaking news alerts. Federal authorities, building on evidence uncovered at Skyline, had opened formal investigations into 3 additional major airlines for similar discriminatory practices. The systemic problems Zara had exposed were receiving unprecedented scrutiny across the industry. The conspiracy Richard and Margaret had nurtured for decades, spanning corporate boardrooms, regulatory agencies, and political connections, was unraveling completely. What began with one black teenager refusing to surrender her rightful seat had catalyzed a reckoning extending far beyond one airline. Tomorrow would bring congressional testimony, implementation of new policies, and the continuing challenge of transforming corporate culture. But tonight, Zara allowed herself a moment to recognize what had been accomplished and what it meant not just for Skyline, but for every passenger and employee who had ever faced discrimination disguised as standard practice. The systems wouldn't change overnight, but they would change. That certainty sustained her as she prepared for the battles still to come. 1 month after Richard Harmon's guilty plea, Skyline Airlines hosted an unprecedented event in its corporate headquarters. The grand ballroom, once reserved for executive functions and VIP customers, now welcomed former employees who had filed discrimination complaints over the past decade. Hundreds of individuals whose careers and dignity had been sacrificed to maintain the airline's traditional culture. Zara moved thoughtfully among the guests, listening more than speaking. Each conversation revealed patterns connecting individual experiences to the systematic discrimination she had uncovered. A black pilot repeatedly passed over for captain positions despite exemplary performance records. A Latina flight attendant disciplined for speaking Spanish to Hispanic passengers. An Indian customer service representative terminated after passengers complained about his accent. These weren't isolated incidents, but manifestations of deliberate policies documented in the files Richard and Margaret had tried desperately to destroy. Now, those same files formed the foundation for Skyline's unprecedented remediation program, including financial compensation, reinstatement opportunities, and public acknowledgement of institutional failures. Vivian joined Zara as the formal program began, both women taking seats among the audience rather than at the executive table. Their decision reflected a fundamental principle of the new Skyline: leadership as service rather than status. Carlos Rivera, now heading the newly established Diversity and Inclusion Department, opened the proceedings with appropriate gravity. "Today isn't about corporate apologies or legal settlements," he emphasized. "It's about acknowledging specific harms done to real people through deliberate policies and taking concrete steps toward justice and transformation." The comprehensive remediation plan unveiled that day extended beyond financial compensation. Former employees were offered reinstatement with seniority recognition, back pay for wrongful terminations, and career development opportunities addressing advancement opportunities they had been systematically denied. Most significantly, Skyline established an independent oversight committee led by civil rights attorneys and former transportation regulators. This committee would have unprecedented authority to review all discrimination complaints directly, bypassing management altogether if necessary. No company has ever voluntarily created this level of external accountability, noted Jason Miller, who had helped design the oversight structure. It's a complete reversal from previous practices of burying complaints and silencing victims. While the remediation program progressed, equally significant transformations were occurring throughout Skyline's operations. The airline's notorious premium passenger profile, the coded system for identifying desirable first-class customers based largely on race and appearance, had been replaced with transparent service standards applied equally to all travelers. Hiring and promotion practices underwent similar overhauls. Previously subjective criteria like cultural fit and executive presence were replaced with measurable performance metrics and skills assessments. Training programs specifically addressed unconscious bias in everything from crew assignments to passenger interactions. Most visibly, Skyline's marketing materials now featured diverse passengers and employees across all service classes, a dramatic departure from previous campaigns focusing almost exclusively on white business travelers in premium cabins. This shift reflected not just rhetorical commitment, but fundamental rethinking of the airline's market positioning and customer base. The results of these changes were becoming measurable. Employee satisfaction scores rose dramatically across demographic groups. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment declined by 70%. Perhaps most surprising to skeptical board members, revenue trends remained stable despite predictions that traditional customers would abandon the airline over its transformed corporate culture. Not everyone embraced these changes, of course. Some longtime managers resigned rather than adapt to new accountability standards. Certain frequent flyers publicly canceled their memberships, explicitly citing discomfort with the airline's diversity initiatives. Industry publications featured occasional opinion pieces questioning whether Skyline had overcorrected in response to one unfortunate incident. Zara had anticipated this resistance and prepared accordingly. The company's communication strategy neither ignored criticism nor became defensive, instead consistently refocusing attention on measurable improvements in service quality and employee engagement, resulting from more equitable practices. This approach was tested most dramatically during Stephanie Walsh's first public appearance as part of the Ethics Oversight Committee. Speaking at an industry conference on customer service, she delivered unflinching testimony about her participation in systematic discrimination against passengers of color. "We were trained to use coded language and plausible pretexts," she explained to a stunned audience of airline professionals. Phrases like cabin balance and passenger compatibility that sounded neutral but meant identifying black and brown passengers for removal from premium cabins. It wasn't about individual prejudice, it was company policy, carefully designed to appear non-discriminatory while achieving discriminatory outcomes. Her candid description of these practices created intense discomfort among industry representatives, who recognized similar systems operating within their own airlines. Several walked out in protest. Others remained but challenged Stephanie's account, suggesting she was exaggerating to protect herself from legal consequences. The backlash intensified when conference organizers abruptly canceled the remainder of the session, citing scheduling conflicts, but transparently attempting to suppress uncomfortable truths about industry practices. Video of the truncated presentation went viral nevertheless, forcing long overdue conversations throughout the aviation sector. Meanwhile, federal investigations into other airlines accelerated based on evidence provided through Richard and Margaret's cooperation agreements. These investigations revealed patterns strikingly similar to those uncovered at Skyline, suggesting not coincidental parallel development, but coordinated industry practices shared through executive networks and industry associations. For Zara, these developments confirmed her initial instinct that the problem extended far beyond one flight attendant or one airline. Discrimination had become industrialized, standardized, systematized, and integrated into routine operations, so thoroughly that many participants didn't even recognize it as discrimination rather than normal business practice. This perspective informed her testimony before the Congressional Transportation Committee, where she appeared alongside other industry leaders to address systemic discrimination in commercial aviation. Unlike other witnesses who offered vague commitments to reviewing practices and enhancing sensitivity, Zara presented specific evidence and concrete reforms. The issue isn't isolated incidents or individual prejudice, she explained to legislators. It's systematic policies deliberately designed to appear neutral while producing discriminatory outcomes. Addressing this requires not just diversity, training, but structural changes to hiring, promotion, service delivery, and most importantly, accountability systems. Her testimony stood in stark contrast to industry representatives who continued minimizing the scope of the problem and resisting regulatory oversight. The difference didn't go unnoticed by committee members or the public, with UR's Skyline standard trending nationally as viewers compared Zara's forthright approach with defensive corporate posturing from competitors. Back at Skyline headquarters, the contrast between past and present became particularly evident during Richard Harmon's sentencing hearing. From a conference room repurposed as a viewing area, employees watched livestream coverage as the former executive received a 12-year prison sentence for civil rights violations, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly noteworthy. "These weren't impulsive acts or isolated misjudgments," she observed grimly. "The evidence shows a calculated, systematic effort to deny equal treatment based on race, while creating elaborate mechanisms to conceal these practices. Such deliberate violation of fundamental civil rights warrants significant consequences." Margaret Whitfield received a lesser sentence of 5 years due to her eventual cooperation, though her financial penalties actually exceeded Richard's. The court ordered disgorgement of millions in profits directly traceable to discriminatory practices she had helped design and implement. The ruling established important precedent for holding investors accountable for knowingly profiting from civil rights violations. These legal proceedings received significant coverage, but Zara ensured equal attention for Skyline's positive transformations. The airline hosted open houses showcasing new training programs, transparent complaint systems, and employee resource groups. Media tours highlighted tangible changes in everything from hiring practices to in-flight service standards. Most impactful was Skyline's industry-leading transparency initiative, quarterly public reporting on discrimination complaints, investigations, and resolutions. This unprecedented accountability measure initially drew skepticism from industry, analysts who warned about potential brand damage from acknowledging problems. Instead, the transparency generated surprising customer loyalty, particularly among travelers who had previously avoided the airline due to its reputation for discriminatory treatment. People understand that problems will occur in any large organization, Zara explained during a business leadership forum. What builds trust isn't claiming perfection, but demonstrating commitment to addressing issues openly when they arise. This philosophy informed perhaps the most significant moment in Skyline's transformation journey: the public event where Zara officially forgave Stephanie Walsh for her role in the original discriminatory incident. The carefully structured conversation, broadcast live through company channels, addressed accountability without vengeance, responsibility without shame. What happened on that flight reflected systems larger than any individual, Zara acknowledged, sitting across from Stephanie before assembled employees and media. Those systems were designed at the highest levels of the company, implemented through training and incentives, and reinforced through rewards and punishments. Acknowledging that context doesn't eliminate personal responsibility, but places it in proper perspective. Stephanie's response demonstrated the genuine evolution in her understanding. "I could say I was just following directions, but that would be a cop-out," she stated frankly. "I had choices, even within a flawed system. I chose compliance over conscience repeatedly, not just on that flight but throughout my career. Taking responsibility means acknowledging those choices and working to repair the harm they caused." The exchange modeled nuanced approach to accountability that recognized both systemic pressures and individual agency, a stark contrast to the binary narratives of complete innocence or total villainy that dominated public discourse about discrimination. The resulting conversation throughout Skyline and beyond created space for genuine reflection rather than defensive posturing. This approach characterized all aspects of Skyline's transformation under Zara's leadership. Rather than performative, diversity initiatives or superficial inclusion messaging, The airline implemented substantive structural changes addressing root causes of discrimination. Rather than quick fixes or symbolic gestures, they committed to ongoing evaluation and adaptation based on measurable outcomes. 6 months after the confrontation that had sparked this transformation, Skyline hosted a formal reopening ceremony for its completely redesigned corporate headquarters. The architecture itself reflected new values: transparent glass replacing imposing walls, collaborative workspaces instead of hierarchical offices, inclusive design features ensuring accessibility for employees and visitors with disabilities. The event marked both celebration of progress and commitment to continuing evolution. Employees from all levels and departments participated equally, reflecting the flattened organizational structure that had replaced rigid hierarchies. Community representatives and civil rights organizations, once excluded from corporate functions, now participated as valued partners. Zara addressed the assembled crowd with characteristic directness, acknowledging both achievements and challenges ahead. Transformation isn't a destination, but a continuing process, she emphasized. We've dismantled discriminatory systems and created more equitable alternatives, but maintaining these changes requires ongoing vigilance and adaptation. She specifically acknowledged the unique circumstances that had enabled rapid change at Skyline, her ownership position providing authority that most discrimination victims lacked. Most people facing systemic discrimination don't own 51% of the company discriminating against them, she noted with subtle humor that drew knowing laughter. Our responsibility extends beyond our own operations to advocating for accountability throughout business and society. This broader vision had already begun materializing through the industry consortium Vivian had proposed months earlier. Initially, viewed skeptically by competitors, the Equitable Aviation Alliance had gained momentum as federal investigations made resistance increasingly untenable. 5 major airlines had joined, agreeing to shared standards for transparent complaint processing, demographic data collection, and independent oversight. The consortium established specific metrics for evaluating equality in customer experience, employee advancement, and corporate governance. Participating airlines published standardized reports allowing direct comparison of performance across these dimensions. The resulting accountability created powerful incentives for continuous improvement industry-wide. As the reopening ceremony concluded, Zara stood beside Vivian watching employees, community partners, and media representatives mingling freely in spaces once reserved exclusively for executives. The contrast with Skyline's former corporate culture couldn't have been more striking. "Did you ever imagine we'd get here?" Zara asked quietly. "When you first discovered my algorithm at that science fair, did you envision any of this?" Vivian considered the question thoughtfully. "I recognized your technical brilliance immediately. Your moral courage became evident later. But this?" She gestured toward the transformed space and the diverse community inhabiting it. "This exceeds even my most optimistic expectations." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Carlos Rivera, now confidently directing the diversity and inclusion initiatives he had once feared advocating. "The stock report just came in," he announced with evident satisfaction. "We've reached an all-time high. Turns out ethics and profits aren't mutually exclusive after all." The financial validation held special significance given predictions that Skyline would collapse under Zara's inexperienced leadership. Instead, the airline had emerged stronger through transformation, not despite addressing discrimination but because of it. Improved employee engagement, enhanced customer loyalty, and reduced legal liability all contributed to performance exceeding industry averages. As the celebration continued around them, Zara reflected on the journey from that first confrontation in the aircraft cabin to this moment of genuine transformation. The discrimination she had faced wasn't unique. It had been experienced by countless passengers and employees throughout the airline's history. What made her experience different was the power to demand accountability and implement change. That realization informed the initiative she would announce the following week. The Skyline Justice Fund, endowed with $50 million from company profits to support discrimination victims throughout the transportation industry. The fund would provide legal representation, career development, and advocacy resources to individuals challenging systemic discrimination without Zara's advantages of ownership and wealth. This commitment to extending transformation beyond Skyline itself represented the culmination of her original vision, not just creating one equitable company, but catalyzing industry-wide change. The path forward wouldn't be easy or straightforward, but it had been definitively established. Later that evening, as celebrations wound down, Zara took a moment alone in the redesigned boardroom. The circular table representing equal voice had replaced the hierarchical arrangement that once elevated executive authority above all others. The walls featured artwork created by employees from throughout the company, representing diverse perspectives and experiences. On a digital display, the new company slogan appeared beside real-time operational metrics measuring both financial performance and equality indicators. "Everyone belongs in first class." The phrase captured Skyline's transformed identity, not just a transportation provider, but a community committed to equal dignity for all passengers and employees. What had begun with one black teenager refusing to surrender her rightful seat had become a movement for justice extending far beyond one flight or one airline. Zara touched the simple gold pendant she still wore, her mother's gift symbolizing persistence against barriers. The airline that had once discriminated against both her parents had been transformed into a model of inclusion. The systems designed to exclude people like her now actively promoted equality of opportunity and treatment. The work wasn't finished. Transformation never is. But standing in that redesigned space, surrounded by evidence of profound change, Zara Johnson allowed herself to recognize what had been accomplished through courage, perseverance, and unwavering commitment to justice. One step at a time, one policy at a time, one conversation at a time, the impossible had become reality. Everyone belonged in first class now, and no one would tell them to move. The story of Zara Johnson teaches us that discrimination is rarely just about isolated incidents. It's often embedded in sophisticated systems designed to appear neutral while achieving discriminatory outcomes. These systems persist because they're protected by powerful networks spanning corporate boardrooms, regulatory agencies, and political connections. True transformation requires more than diversity training or symbolic gestures. It demands structural changes to hiring, promotion, service delivery, and accountability mechanisms. Most crucially, it requires courage from individuals willing to challenge established norms, despite potential consequences. Zara's journey shows that even the most entrenched discriminatory systems can be dismantled when confronted with unwavering determination and strategic action. She succeeded not just because of her ownership position, but because she combined moral clarity with pragmatic solutions that improved the company overall. The story also highlights the importance of allies at all levels, from Vivian's mentorship to Jason's legal expertise to Stephanie's eventual testimony. No one person can transform an entire system alone. Meaningful change requires collective action across positions and perspectives. Perhaps most importantly, Zara demonstrates that addressing discrimination isn't just morally right but also good business. Skyline emerged stronger by replacing discriminatory practices with equitable alternatives, proving that ethics and profitability can reinforce rather than contradict each other. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered what you could do about it? Has this story inspired you to speak up when you see injustice happening around you? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever been in Zara's position, facing discrimination and having to decide whether to challenge it, share your experience. What gave you the courage to stand up? Comment, courage, if you believe speaking truth to power makes a difference. And if you've been moved by this story of transformation and justice, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that shine a light on important social issues. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that make a difference. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Zara's powerful story. Remember, creating change begins with refusing to accept injustice, even when, especially when, the systems seem too powerful to challenge.